Morning and welcome to the WEEL reading group for July 2024. Today we have got Dr. Lutfun Nahar Lata, who is presenting her most recent paper. Just to say to everybody, we are recording today, and so if you don't wish to appear on the video, then please keep your camera off. Right, if you do make a major contribution today, we will be sending you a media release form because the recording is going to be uploaded to the British Sociological Association's YouTube channel, which you can watch later. Right, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Vivian Galata, who's going to introduce our presenter today.
Okay, Lutfun, thank you so much for being here with us. We are really delighted. And let me do a very short introduction to your work. So Dr. Lutfun Nahar Lata is a lecturer in sociology and social policy at the University of Melbourne School of Social and Political Science. Her research is centered on the sociology of work and employment, including the gig economy and future work scenarios. Additionally, she examines poverty governance, urban marginality, housing and place-based disadvantage. Dr. Lata employs a mixed methods approach, integrating qualitative, quantitative, and digital research, and collaborates with multidisciplinary teams from academia, industry, and government sectors. Some of her key publications are Spatial Justice, Contested Governance, and Livelihood Challenges in Bangladesh at Routledge, 2023, New Tech, Old Exploitation, Gig Economy, Algorithm Control, and Migrant Labor, where she looks for the gig economy impact on migrant labor. A third one is Whose Vision, Whose City, is a chapter that discusses urban visions and their implication for different stakeholders, advancing collaborative social outcomes through place-based solution, and social science as social action to address inequalities, and advocates this article for the use of social science as a tool to address and mitigate social inequalities. Dr. Lata's research is featured in prominent journals such as Current Sociology, The Sociological Review, Gender, Work and Organization, Cities, and Journal of Contemporary Asia. We are very glad to have you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invite and for the long intro. So I'm going to share my slides. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'm going to present my current sociology paper today, the production of space, counter space. And just a minute. So in Australia, we usually start with what we call, why is it not moving to the next one? Yeah, what we call the acknowledgement of country. So I would like to, and can you see my full screen, not my notes page, right? Okay, and so I'm starting with the acknowledgement of country. So I acknowledge that I live and work on the Wurundjeri people's land, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And so this is the outline of my work. So I'll briefly discuss the background of my research and conceptual framework, then methods, findings, discussion, and conclusion. So this paper is from my PhD research, and I did my fieldwork in Dhaka in a slum called Sattola slum. So I mainly recruited participants from Sattola slum, but before going to details about methods, very briefly, a background why I did this research. So in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, usually each year, 300,000 to 400,000 rural poor migrate to Dhaka in search of livelihoods, because in rural areas, there are not many livelihood options. Most of these people end up living in slums, as the fastest growing megacities are failing to provide support for livelihoods. For the urban poor, informality, which refers to activities that largely remain unrecognized by formal regimes and includes both housing and livelihood practices, is important to the economies of the southern cities. And the informal economy usually provides 60% to 80% of urban jobs and up to 90% of new jobs in many cities, including Dhaka. The informal sector provides the most important livelihood options for the poor. The concept of livelihood refers to a means of gaining a living, especially focusing on informality, both in terms of economic activities and the use of public space by slum residents. Among other numerous barriers of informality in income earning opportunities, the urban poor in Dhaka experience barriers in accessing public space to conduct businesses for livelihood, including spaces around locations close to their dwellings and outside their settlements. Existing research also revealed that access to public space for livelihoods is very important to other cities in the global south. And so within this kind of context, I tried to find out like what kind of barriers or challenges the urban poor experience while accessing to public space and how they negotiate with different groups of stakeholders to access the public space. And so in this paper, I kind of relied on the conceptual framework where I use the concepts informality, social capital, translocal, network, and livelihoods. And so informality, as I have already mentioned, like it's a practice, it's kind of, it's a kind of way of livelihood style in global south countries where the people sometimes are involved in economic activities that is kind of not legally sanctioned by the state. And so they are kind of known as informal work. But informality is also kind of a continuum because, for example, Oren Yeftshal, when he discussed from the Israeli context, he kind of talked about how in terms of use of space, it could be kind of a formal and informal, or kind of sometimes a state recognizes a particular place as legal and sometimes consider this is illegal. And so Yeftshal talked about how a state can create gray space. Whereas Ananya Roy, she wrote from the Indian context, and she used the term urban informality to refer to a state of deregulation, one where the ownership, use, and purpose of land cannot be fixed and mapped according to any prescribed set of regulations or law. And these kinds of informal practices led to informal urbanization, where elite groups also encroach on land in the same way as the urban poor. Yet their encroachments are ignored by the state, whereas the urban poor are labeled as criminals for engaging in the same behavior. And so I also kind of use the concepts of translocal social network, because in my case, I found like many migrants, they kind of migrated from the same areas and they created their own networks and they use that network to earn their livelihoods and to navigate Dhaka's space. So the term translocal network refers to sets of multi-directional and overlapping networks constituted through migration, in which the exchanges of resources, practices, and ideas links. So this is kind of a terminology that Greiner developed. But translocality is not automatically created through migration, but it is formed through regular communication, through the exchange of resources, and through investments in one's local and translocal network. In particular, social networks are important to the notion of translocality as they conceptually link agents near and far apart, as well as structure and agency. They form the constituting the social space, and they form the interpersonal structure that connect individual agents and institutions and organizations. And so if a person belongs to a particular network and then kind of move to another space or kind of another cities, and then they might also find people from the same localities are migrating to the same place, and they often kind of exchange ideas, exchange different strategies to get by their everyday lives. The other concept I used in this paper is place, space, and counter space. So I heavily relied on Henry Lefebvre's theory of the production of a space. And so Lefebvre talked about a triad. So when he discussed the production of a space, Lefebvre develops a conceptual triad by kind of integrating three concepts known as perceived space, conceived space, and lived space. By perceived space, Lefebvre refers to the physical framework of a place, other routes or networks, and concrete features that link everyday life and activities to private life and leisure. For the urban poor of Dhaka, any kind of open perceived space can be regarded as their space of livelihood. Conceived space is tied to the relations of production and to the order that those relations impose, such as to knowledge, science, to course. And this space is created by planners, architects, geographers, bureaucrats, and state actors, often the powerful actors in the cities. And the idea of conceived space is particularly important when considering how planners and developers have considered or ignored how kind of the need of urban poor. And in terms of Dhaka's case, the urban poor's need for housing and livelihood spaces are often ignored in the formal planning map. The last component of Lefebvre's conceptual triad, lived spaces, depicts the images of users and inhabitants rather than the designers or the processes that produce the physical space. There's a contested relationship between conceived and lived spaces, as the conceived space seeks to mold the space it dominates and to reduce the obstacles and resistance it encounters there. Conceived space has a dominating nature, planned in abstract conceptualizations by technocrats and urban planners, often ignoring the meaning and practices attached to place by users, those who inhabit in those places. However, Lefebvre also spoke about the producing counter space. And so I used that idea of counter space because I thought like the way city is designed by the planners and geographers or the powerful groups, in my case study, the poor, urban poor are able to kind of reproduce or kind of reimagine that space in a sense that the powerful actors didn't think those spaces will be used for. So Lefebvre's theory of space kind of calls for an exploration of the dominant mode of the production of a space and how it is used to exercise power over population and marginalized groups. Lefebvre discusses the possibility of creating a counter space by the marginalized groups. And so he discusses the possibility of the production of counter space by the marginalized groups or people from below. Counter space can be produced by challenging the hegemonic power by reappropriating the space that was kind of designed by the powerful actors. And so in this paper, I kind of showed how the urban poor in Dhaka kind of reproduced the design, the space, the planned space, and used that for their livelihoods. In terms of methodology, I use a qualitative case study approach, and I used Sattola slum as a case study, but I did fieldwork both within the slum and outside the slum. And I did fieldwork for 4 months. I collected data from 94 informal workers, and I also interviewed a range of different stakeholders. So I interviewed 37 key informants. Some of them are government officials, and some of them are NGO officials and kind of local community members. My interviews lasted between 30 to 90 minutes. I also kind of took regular observation notes, and I used to kind of roam around the slums and other parts of the cities where these informal vendors used to work. And that's a photo of me, and that's the photo of the book that came out last year from my project. And so in terms of findings, in this paper, what I did, I kind of presented two main findings. So one of them is like how the urban poor claim a space and use that for livelihoods through their translocal networks in Dhaka. So this is a quote from one of my participants, Miraj, a male food vendor, who said like he has been living in Dhaka for 5 years. My relatives live here. I did not like my villages as there were not many employment opportunities. So I talked to my relatives first and then decided to come to Dhaka. My uncle's son and aunt's sons live there. And so I'm not going to read this whole quote, but the main message from this quote is like, often the urban poor, when they migrate to Dhaka, they often rely on their relatives. So that could be like their direct kin or that could be their fictive kin. And so they often stay with them in the first place. And they often start their businesses with those relatives. And sometimes they also get business capital from their relatives. And so this kind of shows how they rely heavily on their translocal networks. And this is a kind of a image that I created from my interviews. And what I try to show in this kind of figure is like how many of my participants actually migrated from the same village. It's called Vola. It's kind of a southern village in Bangladesh. And so there are issues with flood and many of them kind of lost their houses. And so many of them kind of migrated to Dhaka because they didn't have many options to earn their livelihoods in those parts of Bangladesh. And so this kind of figure shows like how these people migrated in different periods, and then how other people kind of migrated and entered into the same kind of livelihood practices, and how they are connected either by blood or like their kind of fictive kin. And this table also shows like how, as I have mentioned already, many urban poor also rely on their relatives for business capital. And so this table is from my fieldwork, and it shows most of the participants actually received loan from their relatives, and then some of them got loans from NGOs. So this also shows like how the urban poor heavily rely on their translocal social networks. And then they also sometimes they find their first livelihood space or first business spot through their networks. And sometimes they form a network and then they use that network to kind of create some opportunities where, for example, in this case, called Lola, male food vendor, he kind of said how they created a network of people who are in the same business. As a result, a supplier comes to Sattola, the slum, where I did my fieldwork, and then they supply chicken to everyone, whoever is engaged in this business. And today I bought 4 kilograms chicken. I bought 20 kilograms of cow's stomach at a price of $14 from Moyalesket. And I always buy cow's stomach from him. And then he kind of mentioned like how he bought other elements, and then he usually go to do his business around 3 p.m. And so he sells almost till midnight this processed food he makes. And so this is not the real participant, but this is kind of a photo that I took from people who are engaged in kind of similar food processing business. And some other participants also said when they initially started their business, they often kind of rely on their translocal networks. For example, if someone decides that they don't want to go to do their business on a particular day, they might tell that person that you can go and use my space outside the slum, and then you can do business today. So that's how sometimes they started their business. And so usually using public space for livelihoods are illegal in Dhaka. And so I was interested in kind of exploring how they use this space and who are the stakeholders that they need to connect with to access this space. And so what I found, they often co-opt or create relationships with local level brokers and informal power brokers to continue their business and claim space. And so they pay a lot of, every day they kind of pay a certain amount of money. And that's kind of, if we compare how much they earn and how much they pay, so the difference is not much that they have. For example, Saki, this food vendor, he kind of says like, my brother pays 3.57 US dollars. So it's $1 US equivalent to 117 Bangladeshi taka. So it's almost like 500 Bangladeshi taka they pay every day for doing business in Bonani and an affluent neighborhood in Dhaka. And then he kind of said like how he also pays to a lineman. A lineman is someone who usually collects protection money every afternoon from all the vendors who are running business on the sidewalk or other public spaces. And then they had to also sometimes pay police directly, or like sometimes linemen usually pay the police. And then they also collect money for local ruling political parties leader. So that's AL means Army League, which is kind of a local ruling party at the moment. And then so they pay different groups of people to kind of claim that space for their businesses. And that's how kind of they use that space, they appropriate that space. And this is an example of where Sohail kind of said how police officers, so one of the things before I should talk about this code is like they pay police and local police station as well as like local politicians to kind of secure a space for their livelihoods. However, even after that, sometimes the police evicted them when they get like order from their higher up. And so Sohail is kind of saying that sometimes police officers evict them because the senior police officers force them to evict. Not everybody also gave money. So sometimes the new traders argue with police and they don't want to move from the place if the police tells them to move. And so I was kind of asking, so police don't collect money directly. And then they said, no, if police collected money from us directly, that would be good. They have mediators, which I call linemen. So they have mediators for that, and they get a share from the collected money. And there are duty custody police. There are police who drive around the road at night and they take money. They collect like 0.24 US dollar from us. There are also police from the camp. So he talked about like how different groups, different types of police actually collect money from them. And so he kind of mentioned that the big terrorists of Dhaka city are police. They arrest innocent people and pick them up in their car. And if the victim pays them like $2 US, they release him. And this thing came up from many participants. So many, like one of the young participants kind of told me how he had a fight with the police because he denied to pay the police. And then he had to basically leave that particular neighborhood because he fought with the police. And he's like, but why do I pay? This is my money. So he was young. So I think he had more kind of a energy to fight with police, but other people don't really argue with police. And so through these findings, what I kind of show or argue in this paper is about like how the urban poor use their kinship networks and then create some sort of illegal relationships, but very useful relationships for them with police and different kind of powerful groups like the informal power brokers as well as political leaders. And so in this, through using these findings in this paper, I argued that the urban poor are able to break the planned order of the city, which later termed as concept space, and produce a counter space by using a range of strategies, such as quite an appropriation of land, utilizing translocal migrant networks, using special mobility and making informal, mutually beneficial pacts with a range of local, state, and non-state actors, working outside of their formal roles. The urban poor rely heavily on their kin and fictive kin and use their translocal networks in appropriating and reappropriating public space for livelihoods. It should be also noted that the urban poor of Dhaka do not only rely on their kinship networks, rather similar practices are evident in other parts of the global south, where strong social networks and kinship play an important role in the livelihood practices of the urban poor. Although this practice is to some extent different from welfare states in the global north, who often provide safety nets for the marginalized groups. This is an important network for the urban poor in the south, and as southern states do not provide much employment opportunities or other public services for the urban poor. Thus, the findings of my research contribute to the sociological literature on mobility and social networks, as well as demonstrate the importance of adopting a translocal view in researching the livelihoods of the urban poor, which can enhance our understanding of the on the complex rural-urban connections that comprise an important element of livelihood strategies for migrant households. In addition, the findings also reveal that street vendors quickly learn about the mandatory security payment and the rules of the state from their kin and social networks, and use these methods to appropriate available public space, which Aseba termed as as street politics. By learning these rules of the street and entering into an informal pact with powerful state and non-state actors, vendors also break the planned legal order of the city to produce a counter space, which they use for their livelihood. Counter spaces are produced by a marginalized group in opposition to the considered spaces constructed by the state apparatus. So that's how kind of I theorized in this paper, like how the urban poor produce counter space. I think the WEEL group already got this paper. So I published this in kind of sociology. So thank you. That's all from me. I'm happy to answer any questions, comments now.
Thanks very much, Lutfun. Fascinating research. We're going to open this up for questions and discussion now. And I think, Vivian, you were really keen to ask a question about the methodology.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lutfun. I really enjoy your presentation and the research. And I do have one question, and the second one, but later on. The first has to do with methodology. How did you succeed in accessing the people, the interviewees? Because I guess it was, when I read the paper, I could understand that it's quite difficult because these are places that are in the border of legitimacy, what you are allowed to do or not allowed to do. So, and you did manage to have quite a big number of interviewees. So what's your secret? I mean, how did you make it to have access to interviewees?
Thank you, Viviana. That's a great question. So, like what I did actually, I was kind of trying to map the whole slum first. So I recruited a couple of research assistants when I went to do my fieldwork initially, because I was trying to get a sense like how many people are actually involved in informal economy. And so I had like 4 research assistants, and I kind of trained them and told them what I want to do in the first place. And then we did a kind of a slum survey where my research assistants helped me. So we went to kind of the slum and then asked everyone like who works in what kind of occupation they have, how many people work in a particular households. So I did a kind of an informal slum survey, and my research assistants helped me to do that initially. And then I also used to hang out a lot initially in the slum. And then one of my kind of colleagues from Bangladesh, they introduced me to one of the NGO kind of staff who used to work in that particular slum. So initially, I spent a lot of time talking to different NGOs who were based in that particular slum, and kind of talk to people who used to come to those NGO offices. And I also used to kind of observe all the activities that happening within the slum and outside slum. So, and often having informal chats with people and tell them what I'm doing, like what I'm going to do. And So initially I tried to build a bit of rapport before I started recruiting interviews. And then I talked to them. So like once I kind of think like I built enough trust with them, then I approached them for interviews. So I spent a bit of like almost 10 days in the first like 2 weeks to build rapport with people and kind of talking to different stakeholders, and they introduced me with other people. So that's how I started recruiting. And then not everyone talked for 1 hour. So some of them were like, yeah, going to do their business, and I might walk with them and talk to them. So I did kind of a walking interviews many times. So that was interesting too.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Could I ask a question? Yeah, I was so excited to read your paper, Lutfun. I've come across Lefebvre recently, and obviously it works so well in this context. I'm really interested in the forces and flows. Obviously, how participants kind of feel, this contested space. I mean, this is kind of like lots of questions all kind of rolled up into one, really. I'm just interested in, the forces and the flows. We've got these flows of people from the rural to the urban, and they're supported by their network. So we can see some clear flow there, but the forces there as well. And I'm particularly interested in the role of the NGOs, because I imagine that they would like people coming in to go to a more legitimized form of working, but with all the tax and informal taxes on their livelihoods, they're not going to be left with very much in, to actually change their situation, improve their situation. So I'm really, really kind of interested in these this idea of forces and flows and how that works and how the participants view that contested space. Are they left with very much, what kind of percentage of their daily income are they left with after all this? Yeah, if we could just like talk a bit about that, please.
Thank you, Caroline. That's a great question. So I think, yeah, like one of the participants, which I somewhere like wrote about, like he actually said that he felt so sad that he had to pay every day this amount of money, that he feels like somebody is ripping his heart. It's just like, yeah, so it's very sad. But I think what amount of money they might have left. So it's probably, if they earn probably 500 Bangladeshi taka, they probably pay like 100 Bangladeshi taka to these groups. And so they have, and this linemen, although they collect protection money every day, they often collect protection money depending on the scale of an individual's business. So if someone has a kind of a more established business and they somehow know like this person earns more than the others, so they would probably charge that person more, and so that person has to pay more. But whereas if someone, a hawker, might sell cigarettes and bitter leaves, something like that, and they might earn only $100, 100 Bangladeshi taka, 200 Bangladeshi taka, so they might ask that person to give like 20 taka or 50 taka. So it's also kind of very spread depending on people's income. So I think and somewhere I kind of talked about like how linemen, because they're in the bottom of the power structure, they're kind of sometimes also very sympathetic to these people, because that lineman often, they come from a very poor background, so they probably understand how the other poor people feel. So yeah, they are kind of sometimes sympathetic, but then they also say like they have to pay police, they have to pay local political leaders, and they need some sort of money so that they can secure this space for these poor people. So it's a kind of it's really hard. Like I mean, India has done some good work. Like the Indian government provided some sort of legality in terms of vending, so vendors can have registration, and so they have kind of fixed places, but that has other criticisms as well. So it's like not ideal, but still like the government takes the money, which is probably better than some informal groups are extracting these people. And about the role of NGOs, I think NGOs really don't do much in this space because it's kind of outside their territory. So they often provide medical service, like if people need some sort of health services. So some NGOs provide health services, and some NGOs like Prague is one of the NGOs situated in that particular slum. And so they provide education services, so like they provide free education for students until kind of class 4, 5, like primary education. And they also provide some sort of maternal services. So yeah, but they don't really try to save these people from.
I guess it's hard, and there's a lot of vested interests to fight against, I guess, in terms of the forces. And Karen's got her hand raised. Okay, Karen.
So that was so fascinating. Thank you so much. What I'm really interested in, and maybe it just links to Caroline's question, is you did your interviews with your key informants that weren't street vendors, so your government officials, etc. What sort of perceptions were you getting from them in terms of, was there an honesty about the systems that were in place, or did it depend on the type of stakeholder as to whether they presented a very sanitized view of what was happening in terms of this sort of corporate corruption almost? How was it sort of, yeah, so what sort of insights did you gain?
Thanks, Karen. That's a wonderful question. So I think that's what I wrote about, like all these mechanisms in my paper. To whom does the city belong? So it's kind of very interesting that it depends on the stakeholders, even within the government, the stakeholders. Like when I interviewed mayor, they had a very kind of a different view than some other people. So most government stakeholders take the view that like they need to present the city as a kind of a very beautiful city, and these people are kind of loitering the city, so they should go back to their villages. This is not their space. They are kind of illegally encroach this government land, because this slum is kind of based on government, is kind of situated on a government land. And so they keep saying like, this is illegal, they should go back. They're kind of they're making the city dirty. But then there was one particular, I mean, he also kind of said like they should go back to slum, but because he came from a bit poorer background, that particular ward councillor that I interviewed, he was also kind of very sympathetic. He was like, yeah, I know. And the slum dwellers have more access to that particular ward councillor. So they said like, this councillor actually comes to our slum and we could talk about our problems with him. And when I was doing fieldwork, I also saw like he was kind of trying to improve the internal fish market. So he was kind of making it like more, giving it a more permanent structure so that the businessmen there could do their business in a better way. So he was more sympathetic than the other government stakeholders. And the planners, I spoke to planners as well. So the planners kind of said, and I spoke about both livelihoods as well as housing problems. So because these slums, informal settlements are often evicted, like this slum kind of, the slum dwellers often experience probably eviction 4 times, like those who are living there for 15 years or something. So I was asking about their right to the city and their space in the city. And so the planner kind of said like, it's a bit hard because the land price in Dhaka is very high. So government doesn't really want to give this land. Even there might be some NGOs who might be interested in providing money for building houses for slum dwellers. So there's a bit of an issue there, like because of the land price and the like a land shortage in the capital city, they cannot really do it. So I got a variety of perspectives about that, because I was kind of also looking at the planning, the concept space players. So yeah, it was very interesting to hear people's perspectives. But yeah, mostly the government actors, they think they are kind of, they're not the real citizens of Dhaka city.
This again, you know, this raises so many questions really. And although officially they might not want these street vendors here, and there's obviously this contestation because I don't think anybody's got any intention to go away anywhere. And they probably don't, the little bit that they have got invested is a huge, you know, it means a lot to the people there. So they're not going to just walk away from that. So I see this as a hugely contested trade. But again, it kind of reminds me of the Godfather film in a way, you know, in terms of resistance and this contestation, and the younger people who have taken exception to this kind of taxing, this informal taxing system, this exploitation, that what might it lead to, in terms of resisting this taxation? It could get violent, couldn't it? What recommendations do you make in your research?
So I kind of talked about and I had a kind of a chapter on resistance and a paper on that. So it's kind of, I say resistance, overt resistance is probably not going to happen from these people because they are weak and not that powerful, the urban poor, but then also because they make an informal pact with these other groups, other powerful actors, and that's working for them. So they're not going to really claim their rights to the city. But what I recommended in my thesis is the government should probably listen to them and kind of work with NGOs and other stakeholders to provide them space and kind of consult with them, and then find out a way so that they could still earn their livelihoods using a space, but maybe plan the city in a better way so that they could actually do the business, and then people could also work. So there's not much disruption for common people when they kind of use Palestine land and things like that. So that was kind of my recommendation. But I think this is a problem, and government knows about that. I read even in newspapers, how the amount of money the local police station get from these people. So which was kind of very interesting. This is a known practice, but then nobody really interferes. So I don't know, it haven't really changed much since I finished my thesis and kind of wrote about that. So
that's amazing that information was even available to you, actually. So great work. Well, thanks very much. Any more questions, anybody? Karen, go ahead. Can't hear you. Oh, you're muted.
There we are. Sorry about that. Did you gain any insights about any generational change that might be happening? So say from, I don't know whether vendors had been in position long enough to see what impact that had on their children in terms of whether their children's lives were more stable, or whether actually they were inheriting the same sort of instability that their parents were sort of experiencing.
That's a great question, Karen. So I think I saw most of these families who live in slum, they have this aspiration that their children would do better. So I met many their children, and some of them are grown-up children, and they don't really work in the vending sector. So one of them was he was quite educated, and he was kind of working as a driver for someone, like in an office. And then I also met other people who were even sending their children to kind of a private school. And most families actually send their children to school so that they can have a better education. And they have this aspiration that their children will not do this work. They would get better jobs. And so they try their best to educate their children. So yeah, but the other problem is the job market in Bangladesh is so hard. Even people with higher education, having a master's degree, are fighting for kind of a low-level job in the formal job market. So it's really tough for poor people to change their children's lives. But yeah, at least yeah, they try. So that's something I guess I find very interesting, and hopefully some of them would find better jobs.
Really interesting in terms of that sort of internal migration sort of driving mobility, isn't it, in terms of opportunities that maybe wouldn't have been available without that migration. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I wonder if I can ask, oh, sorry, go ahead, Vivian.
I just wanted to come back a little bit to this mandatory payment, because I was thinking when I was listening your presentation, then I thought, oh, there is many common feature in many places. Even in Greece, we had this kind of especially in the very early steps of development of the country, this system of mandatory payments has been built because I think it's a struggle who's going to have the control on the resources. And then for those who do not have access to those resources, then they have to pay these mandatory payments. And then I was thinking, okay, and what about if we have development? Does this system stops anyway? And I was thinking that it becomes a part of the mentality. It's built and it's really embedded in the mentality of the country, of a space. And it works even in other kind of ways, but still remains that. And I think you said it, Lutfun, when you said about the counter space, what does this mean? That it means a way to challenge the hierarchy, the hierarchical power, so that there is a chance that maybe the system will stop to work like that. But also it depends on the margins we have to reverse the system. And that's why it's a kind of comment. It's not really a question, but I'm wondering, because in many countries, I think even in the development, in the countries that are very wealthy, let's say, this system works like that, because it's this kind of struggle who's going to have the control on resources.
Thanks, Vivian. Yeah, so I think that's a challenge, and that's what I kind of said. I had a paper in Cities where I kind of talked about resistance of. The title of the paper is like a marriage of convenience or something. So it's kind of, I was kind of making the argument that, yeah, so it's like because of this informal pact, even like vendors are not going to resist against those informal power brokers. So it's not going to happen. So they're not really resisting against informal power brokers. So the idea of counter production of space in this space is more kind of like how the space is produced by the planners in a way that this would be probably used by pedestrians, or like this is a public space, public park, and then these people are going and encroaching that land and kind of using it for their businesses. So that's kind of how they are breaking the planned order of the city, and then they are kind of creating a new space, reproducing a new space. But in terms of resistance, no, I don't. Yeah, it's gonna. I don't know how long it would take to like change the system. So I agree with you. Like, yeah, it's kind of probably same even in the developed countries. Some of the developed countries, not all. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wonder, Lutfun, if you've got any plans for future research in Dhaka to revisit it, see how those flows are working, see how anything changes. Have you got any plans?
Thanks, Caroline. So I kind of moved my research a bit from Dhaka to Australia because the Australian funding is very much kind of Australia focused. So it's really hard. If I propose I would do fieldwork and like do research in Dhaka, I won't probably get funded. So I still did some research recently, and I have a paper under review now, but that's on more kind of a gig economy. So it's kind of another informal work, but it's kind of more on platforms, and I'm interested in kind of people's understanding of algorithms and like precarious work in the platform, things like that. So I did fieldwork last year, but it was more like how the gig economy and gig workers working in this particular platform. Especially I looked at the transport platforms like Uber, and then I also kind of used another case study called Patao, which is a kind of similar platform like Uber, but it's more popular. And so I interviewed the drivers, and then they also had an informal kind of a drivers association who are kind of fighting for their rights, all this platform workers' rights. So I had a like long focus group discussion with that particular, it's called Dhaka Riders, DRTU, so Dhaka Riders something association, I forgot the last T. Yeah, so I had great data from that research, but I didn't do much work in the same slum. I mean, I did a bit of a telephone interviews later when the COVID happened, was kind of trying to find out like how they are holding up and what was their situation and work. And so that was kind of a couple of years back, like during COVID in 2021. And then since then, I haven't really went back to my field. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm guessing that the third would be relevant to all your research.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. So I shall be watching very closely and reading you quite in depth. So thanks very much for that. Any more questions, or shall we move on? Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Lutfun, for your presentation. We enjoyed it enormously. As I say, it's recorded and we will be uploading it to the British Sociological Association's YouTube channel. We would also include the link in our newsletter so we can circulate that more widely for people to watch your presentation at a later date. So we're going to be just pausing our reading group for the summer. So I'm wishing everybody a really good and restful summer. Hopefully you'll get a nice break, and good luck with everything for the next term or semester, whatever you're doing. Say thank you very much, and to give Lutfun our best wishes and applause. So thanks very much, Lutfun, and say goodbye. Have a wonderful summer.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invite. And I hope to meet some of you at